Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our virtual Doors Open Day weekend. For those of you who have watched Learn with Lorna's, you'll know that I'm just going to pause for a moment so that people can join in, and then I will talk more in a second. So welcome to a virtual Doors Open Day weekend. My name is Lorna Steele and I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. Some of you may be familiar with my face and voice from the Learn with Lorna sessions that have been running over the past 23 or so weeks. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the plan is for this weekend, what we're aiming to do, a little bit more about my remit and some projects I've been involved with in the past, something about the history of the Highland Archive Service and the 4 offices that we operate, and give you a rundown of some different things you're going to hear throughout this weekend. Before I go any further, it's just to say that this film, but also all of the films that you'll be seeing over this weekend, are brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. So High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to watch any of these videos or take part in this event. So please just go onto our Facebook pages. This will be going across all 4 office Facebook pages, or onto our High Life Highland YouTube channel to watch these films with no charge to the viewer. So as I said, my name is Lorna Steele and I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Highland Archive Service. And what my job involves is anything that connects people to the collections that we look after. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those collections are and what makes up an archive and an archive service. But I thought I would start by giving you some examples of projects I've been involved in over the past few years. I've been with the Highland Archive Service since 2014. And some of the projects that I've been involved in and how we have tried to use our collections to reach out to people in local Highland communities right across the Highlands and across the UK. And we're fortunate to have an international following because the subject material we look after is of such interest across the world. And on that note, if you are watching and you're able to say hello, then do that. It would be lovely to hear from you. So I wanted to tell you about some things I've been involved in. I have been very privileged in my role to be able to use our collections to communicate all sorts of different messages to all sorts of different audiences. And I've worked with a lot of schools across the Highlands. I have about 205 schools that fall into my catchment area to look after. So I've engaged with a lot of those schools on different subjects, from Victorians to World War I to how to find out about your own local area, things like that. I do an annual project with Milburn Academy, who are one of the largest schools in the Highlands, and their second year students, so sort of 13, 14-year-olds, come into the Archive Centre each year, look at some of the collections that we hold, and use them as a creative writing inspiration. So they go away and they produce the most extraordinary pieces of creative writing based on our archive material. I was involved in a project a couple of years ago working with the High Life Highland Adult Learning Team for people who have English as a second language. And what we tried to do through that project was show how the experiences of people who left the Highlands 100 years ago, 200 years ago, are replicated by the people now who travel into the Highlands, and how that experience of migration or moving or trying to settle into a new community is something that has continued, and how the human experience kind of repeats over the years. I work with the University of the Highlands and Islands to speak to students during their public history modules about how archives can be used to engage with the public. And one last project I wanted to tell you about quickly was a project I've run the last few years with Inverness Prison. And that's working alongside the education team from Fife College in Inverness Prison to bring archive material to learners within a prison setting. So we've looked at World War I and World War II, and we were due to look at some other subjects this year when COVID hit, so we will come back to that. But that's just to give you an idea of, as I say, some of you will know my name and my voice from the Learn with Lorna sessions, but there's a very wide range of engagement that goes on across our 4 offices, and that's just some of the things that I have been involved in. So I've mentioned the Learn with Lorna talks that have happened, and the purpose of those was to, while our doors were closed due to lockdown, to still enable people to connect with the collections that we look after. And so we covered all sorts of different themes, and all of those are available to watch again on Facebook or on YouTube if you want to. And that also enabled me to talk about some of my favourite documents, including our treasurer's accounts and some of our letters collections and all sorts of things. The reason I am kind of opening with all of this in connection to Doors Open Day is that we take part in Doors Open Day every year as the Highland Archive Service, and it's one of our biggest and most important days. We usually have around 100 people, 110 people who come in to our building and get to experience the collections one-to-one, look at them and chat to us about them and why we care for them and what we do. But we've had to think really differently in the last few months in how we engage people. Our buildings are now starting to reopen, but obviously that's different from the way it was before. And so we've had to find ways to connect people to the collections digitally. The Learn with Lorna sessions has been one of those things. As I say, we would normally be welcoming hundreds of people into our buildings this weekend. So instead, what we're doing is a virtual Doors Open weekend, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But before I go any further, I'm talking a lot about archives, and I'm aware that some people maybe will not know what archives are or what that term describes. I think for a lot of people, they think of archived content on a newsletter, on a website, or something that's no longer relevant, so it's been shelved to one side. And I'm here to tell you it's the opposite. So archives are, there's such a wide range of what archives can be. They can be a huge range of formats. Predominantly what we look after is paper and parchment, but we do have digital records, we do have MP3 files, photographs, maps, all sorts of different things. The main thing about them is that they are unique and that they have been identified as worthy of permanent preservation. So what that means is that a decision has been taken that if those documents and those items were to be lost, it would be detrimental to our collective memory. So we need to have those documents saved so that in the future people can access them and use them, because they contain unique information that can't be got anywhere else. I remember speaking to a school pupil and they said, so this is where our textbooks come from. I said, exactly. So without this material surviving, textbooks and academic books and so on wouldn't be able to be written. So the Highland Archive Service, our remit as a whole is to preserve, conserve, preserve and make accessible the historic records of the Highlands. And we're very, very fortunate in having 4 wonderful buildings to do that in, and I'll tell you about the buildings in a second. We operate under various pieces of legislation, but notably for us, we operate under the Public Records Scotland Act 2011 and Section 1. Hi, Tanya, saying hello. Anyone else wants to say hello, please do. And that piece of legislation says that every authority must set out proper arrangements for the management of its public records. And so, as I say, there are several pieces of legislation we operate under, but that's our kind of guiding one, that we have to provide suitable access to the public records. There's a really long history of preserving historic documents in Scotland. The National Records of Scotland in Edinburgh can trace its roots back to the 13th century, and I'm sure anyone who lives in or has been to Edinburgh will be familiar with General Register House, which is the building as you come down the bridges at the east end of Princes Street. And that was built in the 1700s, the first purpose-built record office in the world. A little bit later, local record offices started to be established. So from the 1970s onwards, there started to be local record offices to look after local records. In 1990, what was then the Highland Regional Council set up the record office for Highland records. And from 1992 to 2009, that was based in Inverness Library in the centre of the town. But we're very fortunate now that we have been able to move into purpose-built buildings, and I'll tell you a little bit about those. So originally, when we were in Inverness Library, that was Highland-wide service. So all the records for the Highlands were held in that one building, with external storehouses, so records were held off-site as well, but the service was based in that one building, and that meant that we had to go, people had to pre-order the night before or tell us what they wanted, and we had to go and fetch the things for people to be able to access them. Then in 1995, the Caithness Archive Centre opened, and so the records that are discrete to the area of Caithness were moved up to Wick into the library building at the time. And the records for Lochaber were extracted from those collections in 2008 and moved into, at that stage, the West Highland College in Fort William. And then in 2009, the Highland Archive and Registration Centre in Inverness was built. And that took the overarching Highland records, and at that stage still took the records for the historic counties of Inverness, Ross and Cromarty, Sutherland, and Nairnshire. And then around about that same stage, 2008, the Skye and Lochaber Archive Centre was built in Portree. So we were fortunate to be able to move the records relating to areas nearer to them. So by 2009, we had the 4 offices. Then in 2017, just a couple of years ago, Nucleus was built, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives. Once I come off this initial introduction, I hope you'll go and have a wee look at some of those pictures and investigate those buildings. Nucleus is an extraordinary building, and that holds now the historic records for the county of Caithness, and it will hold all the nuclear records for Great Britain, and that is a very long process of taking in a vast number of records. And then in 2018, we moved out of West Highland College in Fort William, and the Lochaber Archives moved into Alexander Ross House. So that's where we're at now. We have the Highland Archive and Registration Centre in Inverness, which holds overarching Highland records and the records for Inverness, Ross and Cromarty, Sutherland, Nairnshire, and small parts of Moray. And then we have the Skye and Lochaber Archive Centre in Portree, which holds the records relating to Skye and Lochaber. We have Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, which holds the records relating to Lochaber, and then Nucleus with the Caithness records in Wick. So we're very, very fortunate to be able to have these 4 buildings. And they all have purpose-built strong rooms. They all have temperature-controlled strong rooms, so we can control the temperature and the humidity that our records are kept in, which is of absolute maximum importance to ensuring their preservation. They all have publicly accessible search rooms with regular opening hours, which we're very fortunate to have again. And that obviously has been disrupted with COVID, and we're not back to normal yet, but we are starting to go back to some kind of normality there. And we're also very fortunate to have a conservation studio within our building in Inverness, and that enables us to repair the documents that we look after. And that, although it's based in Inverness, looks after the documents for the whole service, and also does external work. So we do work for Historic Environment Scotland, Aberdeen Archives, all sorts of other people and individuals as well who come to us with a family diary or something that needs repaired. So we're very, very fortunate to have all of these purpose-built facilities. Now, as I say, for a normal Doors Open Day, we would normally be welcoming you to our building. We would have a themed display of materials for you to look at. And you will, if you're following the Highland Archive Centre Facebook page, will maybe have seen some of those pictures up on our Facebook page yesterday of what a normal Doors Open Day looks like for us. Obviously this year we're not able to have people in the buildings, which has been very difficult for us because it's always such a highlight of the year. So instead what I've done is put together some interviews with different members of staff. I'm aware I've spoken a lot on these channels over the last few weeks, that being my main remit. But what I wanted to do with this Doors Open Day was give other staff the opportunity really to talk about their favourite documents, their roles and responsibilities, and what they love about their jobs. And so I've included staff from across all 4 offices. There will be interviews with archivists, with archive assistants, conservators, an interview with Leslie Gray, who is the Chief Registrar for the Highland Council, who is based in our building in Inverness, our family historian, a wide range of people. I think sometimes people are not aware of the huge number of roles that exist within an archive service, and we're very fortunate to have that. And so I wanted you to meet them and to learn a little bit about how we list our collections, how we bring the collections in, how we provide access, how we look after them, and then how we share them digitally and in events. So I'll run through the timetable of the weekend for you so that you can see that. All of those talks will go out on Facebook and YouTube, and all of them are accompanied, apart from one, and there's a reason for that, but all of them are accompanied by slides and images, so you'll get to see people's faces briefly, and then you'll get to see a slide presentation of us chatting about some documents and some records. So I'm going to run through the timetable so that you know what's coming up. I have deliberately spread this out through the weekend, so there will be something every 2 hours through Saturday and Sunday, and hopefully that means that people across the world in different places can catch some of them live, but then you can always go back and watch them later if you want to. So first up today after this introduction will be at 12 o'clock, and that will be an interview with Jennifer Johnston, who is one of the archivists based at the Highland Archive and Registration Centre in Inverness. I've started with her so that I've asked her about what an archivist actually is. What do you do on a daily basis? It's one of those jobs people don't always know a lot about. And so we're starting with Jennifer, and she'll talk about what her job involves, why she loves it, and some of her favourite items within the collection. And that's at 12 o'clock today. And then at 2 o'clock, I'm speaking with Anne Mckay, who is our trainee archivist at the Skye and Lochailsh Archive Centre. We're, again, very fortunate to be in a position that we can take on a trainee archivist. So Catherine is working full-time for the service whilst training to get her postgraduate qualification in archives. So she's going to talk about some of the collections held in the Skye and Lochailsh Archive Centre. And as a local girl, she's going to talk about how important that local area is to her and connecting people to the heritage and history of Skye and Lochailsh. Then at 4 o'clock, the interview with Leslie Gray, who's the Chief Registrar for the Highland Council. So she obviously doesn't work directly for the Highland Archive Service, but she works within the buildings. And in a normal doors open day, she would be talking a little bit about her role and remit. And so we wanted to include her in this series of talks. The registrars have a very important role at the best of times, but particularly through COVID, they have been key workers, and they have had to radically change the way that they operate and the way they provide that registration service for birth, marriages and deaths throughout the COVID outbreak. So it's a really interesting interview about how that role has changed. And then at 6 p.m. today, I'll be chatting with Anne Fraser, who is our Highland family historian. So I'm sure a lot of you will be looking forward to that. Anne is very passionate and experienced in her job and will be keen to explain how to start your family tree, how she can assist. So that'll be Saturday's lineup. And then Sunday we'll be starting at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning with an interview with Anne Mckay, who is an archive assistant from Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness archives. She's going to talk about some of her favourite items from the Caithness collections and what outreach the team in Nucleus have been doing throughout lockdown and throughout the COVID outbreak. Many of our staff were furloughed, the Caithness team were not, so they've been able to be producing all sorts of amazing outreach activities throughout lockdown, and she's going to chat about some of those. Then at 12 p.m. tomorrow, I'll be chatting to Jamie Gock-Roger, who is the Ambala Coordinator. And again, I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with the website Ambala that we run from within the Highland Archive Service. So Jamie is going to talk about the history and development of Ambala, how it came into being, some of his favourite items from the amazing 50,000 items that are on Ambala, and how to contact him if you have any images you would like to appear on Ambala. And then at 2 o'clock tomorrow, I'll be chatting with Aileen McCall, who is our archive assistant at Lochaber Archive Centre. Again, she's a local girl to the area, so she'll be talking a little bit about what it's meant to her to be involved with historic collections from the area that she knows and loves. And she'll be talking about some of the events that have happened there in the past and some of the really interesting finds that have been made in Lochaber to do with all sorts of subjects, like the Anne Lister letters that were found last year. And she'll chat about that. And then at 4 o'clock tomorrow, I'll be chatting with Richard and Carrie, who are two conservators for the Highland Archive Service. They'll be talking about the sort of skills that are required to be a conservator, some of the documents they've worked on, and why they think their role in preserving those documents and making them accessible for the future is important. So you'll see from what I've said that these are all very, very different roles and remits, but they all play a part in recording and preserving the story of the Highlands and the history of the Highlands and the people who have lived there. And so I hope it will be of interest to you to meet and see these different jobs within the organisation. If you're inspired to do so afterwards, please go and have a look at our Meet the Team section on our website. You'll be able to see the faces of all of the people who are talking to you and learn a little bit more about them on there. The final two films I'll be showing tomorrow afternoon at around 6 o'clock will be to do with the development of Inverness Castle, which is part of the Spirit of the Highlands project. This is a huge, new, exciting project coming in the Highlands, and the development of Inverness Castle, which has historically been a courthouse, and the development of that into a tourist attraction, and how we would like you to help us with that, and how there's a role for everybody who has a connection to the Highlands to play in that project. So tomorrow evening there will be a virtual tour of Inverness Castle so that you can see inside the building as it is right now, and then a second film which will talk about the role you can play in the development of the Spirit of the Highlands project. And I'll chat more about that in a brief live film tomorrow afternoon. All of these talks are available on YouTube. They're all available on Facebook, so if you miss some of them or you want to rewatch anything, please do go back and do that. We would be delighted to have you see them again and again and become familiar with them. I'm here all weekend, I'm working all weekend, so if anybody has any questions linking to any of the films that go out, please do just chat away on our Facebook and Twitter pages. I'll be there and I'll be able to respond. And if there's anything that requires more specialist knowledge than I'm able to give, I will make sure the right person gets it and gets back to you. But in the meantime, I'm going to leave you just now. I hope you can join us at 12 o'clock for our first interview, which is with archivist Jennifer Johnston. So we'll look forward to chatting with you then. Thanks.